I don't remember the exact moment I stopped being my parents' son and started becoming their obligation, but if I had to guess, it was somewhere between my brother's third trophy and my first rent payment to them at 17. My name's Wesley. I'm 33 now, a business consultant, and I've spent the better part of a decade pretending my childhood was just tough love. You know the kind, that you're not in trouble, we're just disappointed kind. The kind that gives you straight A's and a stress disorder. But it wasn't until my nephew's graduation party, champagne flutes clinking, balloons tied to folding chairs, and my parents glowing with pride, that I realized just how far they'd taken it. Because when they toasted to my brother's kid, handed him a $10,000 check, and ended their speech with "He's everything we ever hoped you'd be," I smiled like it didn't split something inside me wide open. But let's back up. Let me walk you through how we got to that moment. You have to understand the architecture of my family first. My parents, Richard and Linda, were old school in all the worst ways. Appearances mattered more than apologies. Achievements were transactional. Emotions? Those were for therapy, which we didn't believe in. I was their firstborn, they test run, as my dad once joked at Thanksgiving. Then came my younger brother, Tyler, 4 years behind me and born with the gift of effortless likability. Tyler could set the garage on fire, and they'd laugh and call him curious. I'd forget to unload the dishwasher, and suddenly I was ungrateful and moody. I spent most of my adolescence trying to prove I wasn't a problem. I studied late, worked part-time jobs, volunteered at community events they never attended. When I got accepted into college, on a full academic scholarship, mind you, my dad nodded and said, "Well, I guess all that staying up late wasn't for nothing." That was the closest thing to a "we're proud of you" I ever got. Meanwhile, when Tyler made JV basketball in 10th grade, they bought him a new phone and threw him a steak dinner. But I told myself they just showed love differently, that they were harder on me because they believed in me more. That lie got me through my 20s. After college, I hustled. I built a career from scratch, climbing corporate ladders I wasn't born into. I didn't ask them for help, not once. Not when I was eating canned beans for dinner. Not when my first apartment flooded and my landlord ghosted me. Not even when I had pneumonia and no one to drive me to urgent care. I learned to become my own safety net. I bought my first house at 29. I took pride in it. It was nothing fancy, but it was mine. Hardwood floors, a little garden in the back, a coffee nook I built myself. I invited my parents once. They stayed for 20 minutes, criticized the location, and said, "Well, at least it's a start." Tyler, on the other hand, took a different route. He bounced around from idea to idea. Music school, then culinary school, then some crypto startup that lasted 6 months. He was always figuring things out, and my parents always had excuses ready for him. The world's different now. He just needs a break. Not everyone's path is linear. They paid for his apartment for 3 years, co-signed a car loan, and when he finally landed a job, as a high school gym teacher, you'd think he cured cancer. They bought him a grill and hosted a congrats on adulting barbecue. I brought a bottle of wine. No one noticed. Still, I tried to stay connected. I visited for birthdays. I helped them set up online banking. I handled their taxes when they forgot how. I even slipped them some money when I noticed the mortgage balance wasn't budging, and Dad had quietly stopped talking about retirement. I told myself I was just being a good son, that maybe they couldn't express appreciation, but they felt it. I clung to that belief like a child clutches a blanket. Then came the graduation. Tyler's son, Noah, a decent kid, honestly, was finishing high school. There was a backyard party planned, and for once, I was invited early. "We're doing it big," my mom said on the phone. "He's the first in our family to get into college with a sports scholarship." I almost laughed. Apparently, my academic scholarship didn't count because I didn't throw balls for a living. But I showed up. I always showed up. Their backyard was decked out like a wedding, string lights, catered food, a live band. I brought a personalized leather laptop bag as a gift, something thoughtful for a college freshman. When I handed it to Noah, he smiled and said, "Thanks, Uncle Wes. This is actually really cool." It was probably the most genuine moment of the night. The rest was just champagne and fake small talk, and everyone pretending not to notice that I was alone, again. And then the toast happened. My parents took the stage, and yes, they had a stage, and my mom tapped the mic with a grin. "We just want to say how incredibly proud we are of our grandson, Noah," she said, her voice cracking like she'd just watched him walk on the moon. You've grown into such a fine young man. Dedicated, strong, driven. My dad took over. You remind us of all the best parts of this family, he said, pausing for dramatic effect. You're everything we ever hoped you'd be. And then they handed him a check. A real, actual check. $10,000. I saw the number from across the yard. My aunt gasped. My cousin clapped. Noah looked shocked and grateful. I just smiled. Because what else could I do? No one knew that just 5 days earlier, I called the bank and paid off the remainder of my parents' mortgage. $38,571.12. I'd done it quietly, without a word. No toast. No check. Just a confirmation email and a self-congratulatory whiskey that night. I'd done it because I didn't want them to worry. Because I thought maybe, finally, I'd earn a place at their table. But that night, in their backyard, watching them beam at Noah like he hung the stars, I realized they'd already set that table, and I wasn't on the guest list. I laughed. Not loudly. Just enough to keep my face from crumbling. I laughed like it didn't split me open. Like it wasn't the final straw. But something shifted in me that night. A kind of quiet, deliberate severing. Because if they thought I'd stay silent forever, if they thought I'd keep playing the good son, the invisible benefactor, then they clearly forgot who taught me how to draft a will. And they'd forgotten that I listened. And that's where the Rayall story begins. The next morning, I woke up early even though I didn't sleep. You know that kind of tired where your body's begging to rest, but your mind won't shut up? That was me. I sat at my kitchen counter with black coffee and the leftover ache of that backyard toast echoing in my head. I kept replaying my dad's words, as if somewhere in the cadence, I'd find a hidden clause that made it okay. But no, it was exactly what it sounded like. You're everything we ever hoped you'd be. Meant for Noah. Said in front of me. Said after I'd quietly erased the biggest financial burden of their lives. I didn't tell anyone what I did. Not my friends, not my coworkers, not even my financial advisor. I didn't do it for recognition. But I think a part of me, the small, vulnerable part I'd learned to bury, hoped they'd at least say thank you. Maybe even just a card. A voicemail. A nod. But they didn't. Instead, they wrote a check with a big number on it and handed it to someone who hadn't sacrificed anything for them. Someone who hadn't spent years trying to be enough. But that was just the start. The Monday after the party, I got a call from my mom. I thought, maybe this was it. Maybe the check was a show, and now they were going to thank me, maybe apologize. But nope. Hey, honey, she said in that tone she used when she wanted something. I wanted to ask if you could help us plan the retirement trip. Your dad wants to do Italy this fall, and I have no idea how to use those travel points. I blinked. What trip? I asked. The one we were talking about at the party, she said, like I'd missed something obvious. Didn't you hear? Noah's going to be settled in school by September, and we figured it's finally time to take that dream vacation. We're calling it our reward for surviving parenthood. My throat tightened. I stared at the laptop screen in front of me, still open on the bank dashboard from when I'd paid off their mortgage. Sure, I said flatly, because what else could I say? I'll email you some flight options. I hung up and laughed again. A different laugh this time. Hollow, incredulous. They were using their freedom as a celebration of surviving parenthood. As if I hadn't been part of that survival. As if the years of scraping together rent, skipping vacations, paying their bills behind the scenes, none of it counted. I wasn't part of the narrative. I was just the guy who fixed things behind the curtain so the show could go on. Then things escalated. 2 weeks later, Tyler called. It was rare for him to call unless something broke. This time, it was his car. Hey man, I hate to ask, he began, which meant he didn't. But my AC's busted, and the shop says it's gonna run about $3,000. I'm strapped until next month. Think you could spot me for a bit? I bit my tongue. Don't you have a summer bonus coming? I asked. He laughed. Yeah, but you know how it is. Expenses pile up. Plus, Noah needs dorm stuff, and mom and dad are tapped with the Italy thing. I almost said it then. Almost blurted out that mom and dad could afford Italy because I paid off their mortgage. That the only reason they weren't tapped was because I erased $38,000 from their balance sheet. But I didn't. I transferred him the money. Like a fool. Because it wasn't about Tyler. It was about not wanting to become the kind of bitter older brother who let money define his relationships. But I could feel the bitterness growing like mold. Later that week, I stopped by my parents' house. I don't even know why. Some twisted part of me wanted to hear them say it. Wanted to look them in the eye and see if they'd flinch. The front lawn was perfectly trimmed, the porch freshly painted, with money that didn't exist until I made it so. My mom opened the door with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Wesley, we were just talking about you." Hope stirred, just for a second. Then she added, "We were wondering if you could help Noah with his FAFSA. It's all so confusing, and you're so good with those kinds of things." I blinked. "You mean his financial aid forms?" She nodded. "Well, we told him not to worry about it. We'll help with whatever he needs, but it never hurts to apply. Plus, the college said something about merit-based options too." I was silent for a moment. Then I asked, "You told him not to worry about money?" She shrugged, like that was normal. "Of course. He's got enough on his plate. He's starting this huge chapter, you know." I wanted to scream. Because when I was his age, I was balancing 3 part-time jobs, selling my textbooks back at the end of each semester, and skipping meals to make ends meet. I'd never once been told, "Don't worry about money." In fact, I'd been told the opposite. "You chose that school, you figure it out." But here they were, practically handing him a golden parachute while asking me to fill out his paperwork. That night, I couldn't sleep. Again, I kept thinking about all the little things. How every framed photo in their house was either of Tyler's family or from vacations I was never invited on. How every holiday I spent with them felt like I was crashing someone else's celebration. How they introduced me to friends as our oldest, but never talked about what I did. Meanwhile, Tyler's coaching position was a badge of honor, even though he barely showed up to Thanksgiving sober last year. The breaking point came a week later. It was a Sunday. I was supposed to meet them for brunch, something we did once a month, usually at a diner they liked that served watery orange juice and overly sweet pancakes. I almost didn't go, but again, that stupid part of me still hoped. Still craved a moment of acknowledgement. Just one. I got there early. They were already seated. Tyler and his wife showed up a few minutes later, with Noah in tow. My parents were beaming. My dad was wearing a new watch. The kind of watch that cost more than my first car. "That's nice," I said, nodding at it. "Early retirement gift." My mom laughed. "Tyler got it for him," she said proudly. "Isn't that sweet?" "Used his bonus." Something in me snapped. I turned to Tyler. "The same bonus you said you didn't have 2 weeks ago." He looked caught for a second, then waved it off. "Oh, that. I meant the signing bonus, not the mid-year. They hit at different times." My dad chuckled. "Don't be jealous, Wes. You've got your own fancy toys." I wanted to get up. I wanted to throw my coffee across the table and walk out and never speak to any of them again. But I didn't. I sat there. I listened to them talk about Italy, about Noah's dorm setup, about how blessed they were. I listened until my ears rang. And then my mom said it. "We're so lucky to have a family that sticks together." I mean, look at Tyler, always stepping up. Always there when we need him. Not everyone can say that about their kids. It was like watching someone casually twist a knife in your side while smiling. My dad nodded, sipping his coffee. "Yeah, Ty's the real rock of the family." I didn't speak. Not then. Not during brunch. Not when we left. I hugged them goodbye like nothing happened. But when I got home, I poured a drink, pulled out my files, and stared at the folder I'd kept for years, the one labeled estate planning. It had my will, my power of attorney, my asset breakdown. All of it. And as I looked through the names I'd carefully included, my parents listed as beneficiaries, Tyler as secondary, something shifted. Something final. They thought I'd stay quiet forever. That I'd keep playing the silent support beam while they built their golden boy's castle. But they forgot who they raised. They forgot who taught me how to plan for every possibility. Who taught me the value of leverage. They forgot that I'd built my life with surgical precision, and that I never made a move without knowing exactly where the pieces would land. And now? Now, I was going to move them all. But not yet. Not tonight. Because revenge, the kind that leaves a mark, doesn't come hot and fast. It comes slow, cold, calculated. And I had time. I didn't cut them off right away. That's not how I work. I've spent too many years planning for everything, from early retirement to emergency surgeries, to be impulsive about something like this. Besides, walking away from a lifetime of disappointment isn't as clean as a dramatic brunch exit. You don't just flip a switch and stop hoping they'll finally see you. You pull back slowly, like peeling a bandage off a wound you never let heal. The next few weeks were quiet. I didn't return calls right away. I stopped sending weekend check-ins. When my mom texted me a blurry photo of Noah's dorm setup, I sent back a thumbs up and nothing else. The less I engaged, the more their absence echoed, and not because I missed them, but because I finally noticed how little they ever actually reached out when they didn't need something. They weren't checking in to see how I was. They weren't asking about my life, my work, or my health. They just wanted to orbit around Tyler and Noah, and I was expected to smile from the sidelines like some ghost of the family they used to tolerate. And for the first time in my life, I let myself really feel that. I let the grief of it hit me. The years I spent trying to prove I was worthy, the milestones they shrugged off, the pride they only reserved for the kid who needed bailing out every other month. I didn't distract myself from it. I didn't drown it in work or whiskey. I just let it sit there, in the pit of my stomach, like a stone I'd finally stopped pretending wasn't weighing me down. I was 33, single, estranged from my family, even if they didn't know it yet, and standing in the middle of the life I'd built, a nice condo, a stable job, an emergency fund that could buy me a decent boat. I realized I didn't even know who I was without the need to impress people who didn't care. That was rock bottom. But the fall didn't end with isolation. It kept going. Work got weird. One of our biggest clients pulled out of a consulting package with no notice. Budgets were tightened. My role wasn't threatened exactly, but the stress was a constant hum in the back of my mind. I started sleeping worse, skipping meals, zoning out in meetings. A part of me kept wondering if I'd made a mistake, if this was karma for turning my back on my family. I hadn't even done anything yet, but pulling away felt like betrayal in my gut. Then came the cherry on top. It was a Saturday afternoon. I was at the grocery store, tossing frozen vegetables into my cart and trying not to think about anything heavier than whether I had enough coffee at home, when I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Wesley, a woman's voice asked. "This is Megan. I'm your parents' neighbor." I blinked. "Is everything okay?" She hesitated. "I don't want to alarm you, but your parents had some kind of argument with Tyler in the driveway this morning. It got loud, really loud. I wasn't sure who else to call. Your mom ended up sitting on the curb crying." I closed my eyes. Of course this was happening. "Thanks for letting me know," I said. "I'll check in." I didn't call right away. I just sat in my car outside the store, a bag of melting groceries in the trunk, and stared at my steering wheel for what felt like an hour. I should have felt vindicated. I should have smiled and told myself this was the beginning of their reckoning. But instead, I just felt tired. Tired of being the only one who ever cleaned up the mess, whoever got the phone call, whoever showed up. Still, I went. I showed up. When I pulled into the driveway, Tyler's car was gone. My mom was in the kitchen, eyes puffy, her voice low. "It was stupid," she said when I asked. "He just got upset because we told him we couldn't keep floating him money." She offered a sad little laugh. "Apparently, the school wants all the senior coaches to take some extra certification program, and it costs a couple grand." My dad chimed in from the living room. "We said we'd help if we could, but we're stretched thin after the Italy trip." He didn't take it well. Called us selfish. I didn't say anything. I just nodded. Let them talk. Let them unload their drama onto the only person who ever stood still long enough to catch it. When I got home that night, I sat down at my desk, opened my estate folder again, and began making edits. I moved my parents from beneficiaries to a backup charitable trust. I rerouted the property clause. I updated my living trust to include 2 people who actually cared about me, my best friend Jonathan and my goddaughter, whose birthday I'd never missed. I wrote each clause with intention, not out of anger, out of clarity. And then I started rebuilding. I signed up for therapy, real therapy, not journaling and TED Talks, actual, uncomfortable, dig into the childhood wounds therapy. The first few sessions were brutal. I'd never said some of those things out loud before. Never admitted how often I felt like a burden in my own family. Never talked about how I used overachievement to cover up the fear of being replaceable. But slowly, the fog started to lift. I stopped showing up to gatherings just because it was expected. I stopped sending money without boundaries. I started saying no, not loudly, not cruelly, just firmly. When Thanksgiving came around, I declined the invite. Told them I was traveling with friends. My mom tried guilt-tripping me with the usual, "But you always carve the turkey, and it won't be the same without you." But I held my ground. And instead, I spent that holiday in a cabin in the mountains with Jonathan and his partner, sipping wine by the fire and realizing I'd never felt more at peace. At work, things picked back up. I landed a new client, one that needed a full digital transformation project. It wasn't just good money. It was work I cared about. I led the project myself. I hired a junior analyst I believed in. I stayed late not because I had to, but because I wanted to. My life slowly became mine again. Not shaped around appeasement or sacrifice, but actual choice. I made space for things I'd never prioritized. Cooking classes, a dog I named Murphy, a weekend woodworking group where no one asked what I did for a living. Just guys building stuff, talking about nothing. And the more distance I put between me and the performance of being the good son, the more I saw things clearly. Tyler wasn't the villain. He was just the product of their design. He'd been babied into entitlement, spoon-fed excuses, and trained to believe the world owed him comfort. My parents? They weren't monsters either, but they were small, emotionally limited, unable, or unwilling to see me beyond what I could do for them. I'd waited decades for them to change, but change was never going to come from them. It had to come from me, and it did. But the final piece didn't fall into place until spring, when I got the email. It was from my mom. The subject line read, "Important, family trust discussion." I opened it, heart already sinking. "Wesley, your father and I have been revisiting some of the estate documents, and we'd really love your help. You've always been so good with this stuff. We want to make sure everything is aligned for the future. Tyler has a lot on his plate these days, and we don't want to burden him. Would you be open to having dinner next weekend to go over the paperwork with us? Love, Mom." There it was. The moment I knew would come. The moment they'd need something again. Something big. Something legal. Something with zero margin for error. Which meant they were circling back to the son who always had the answers. They had no idea I'd already rewritten the script. No idea I'd built my own foundation. One where I didn't have to prove anything, or earn their crumbs of approval, or clean up their messes just to be seen. They still thought I was the same Wesley. But they were about to find out just how much had changed. And I would be the one handing them the terms. I didn't reply. Not yet. Because when the reveal came, when they saw what I'd done and who I'd become, I wanted it to land with the full weight of everything they'd ignored, dismissed, and taken for granted. And they weren't ready. But I was. I didn't respond to my mom's email right away. That's the thing about having leverage. You don't need to rush. You wait. You let the tension build. You let them wonder. Because for the first time in my life, they were waiting on me. And I was finally in a position where I didn't need to play the good son just to be allowed a seat at their table. I'd built my own. Still, I read her message more times than I'll admit. There was something chillingly familiar about it. How she tried to package manipulation as kindness. "You've always been so good with this stuff." Translation, "Come fix what we broke again." Tyler has a lot on his plate. Translation, "We'll never burden him with actual responsibility, so we're offloading it onto you, like always." And the kicker? We want to make sure everything is aligned for the future. That one practically glowed with entitlement. They weren't asking me to help because they trusted me. They were asking because they assumed I'd protect the family legacy, even if that legacy never protected me. But I wasn't the same Wesley anymore. I read the email again on a rainy Thursday night, sipping an old-fashioned with Murphy snoring at my feet. I was calm, focused. The part of me that used to ache for approval was quiet now. In its place was something steadier, clarity. I wasn't angry. I wasn't bitter. I was ready, and I knew exactly how this was going to play out. First, I needed to see the cards they were holding. I couldn't launch a plan without knowing the structure of their trust or what they were hoping to pull me into. So, I replied, 3 days later, with a short message. "Sure, we can talk. Saturday dinner works. My place." I figured if they wanted to play power games, they could do it on my turf. That Saturday, I prepped the condo like it was a meeting room. No clutter. A clean table. Printouts of estate planning resources next to a notepad and pen. I even brewed a pot of fresh coffee. It wasn't about hospitality. It was about control. I wanted them to see what order looked like, my order. They arrived right on time. My mom brought a pie I didn't ask for. My dad made some offhand remark about the building being a little sterile. I smiled, let it slide, and waved them inside. We sat down. I poured coffee. No one touched the pie. "We'll get right to it," my mom said, pulling out a manila folder. "Your father and I have been updating our living trust, and since you're named as executor, we wanted to make sure you were up to speed." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm the executor?" "Well, yes," she said, shifting in her seat. "You've always been good with details. And, well, Tyler's got a lot on his plate." "Of course he does." I opened the folder. It was standard stuff at first: durable power of attorney, healthcare directives, a few pages of asset distribution. Then I got to the distribution clauses, and my stomach twisted, not with pain, but with confirmation. Tyler was set to inherit the house, the car, and 80% of the remaining estate. I was listed for the residual assets, anything not specifically allocated, which, in their minds, probably meant whatever junk was in the garage and the mismatched plates in the cupboard. They didn't even look ashamed. My dad spoke like he was reading from a script. We figured it made sense. Tyler has a family to take care of. He'll need the stability. You're already in a good place. I stared at them for a long moment. So, after everything, you're rewarding him for needing more help? Silence. And I'm the one expected to manage this trust? To carry out your wishes? More silence. My mom finally spoke. We just thought you'd understand. That was the moment something clicked. I did understand. I understood that no matter how much I gave, they would always give more to the person who gave less. That my competence wasn't a point of pride to them. It was a convenience. And now they were trying to use it one last time, to tidy up the end of their story without ever acknowledging who cleaned up all the chapters that came before. But I wasn't going to say no. I was going to say yes, because agreeing to be the executor was the first move in a much bigger plan. Okay, I said quietly, closing the folder. I'll handle it. They exhaled in relief, completely missing the shift in my tone. My mom even reached across the table and patted my hand. We knew we could count on you. I smiled. That night, after they left, I started phase 2. I called my lawyer first thing Monday. Sandra, mid-40s. Brilliant. She handled my business contracts, my living trust, and now, my strategy. I booked a 3-hour block and laid out the situation. The years of favoritism. The estate plan. The unspoken expectation that I'd clean up another mess and fade into the background again. Sandra didn't say much at first. She just listened. Then she leaned back and said, "So you want to hold the pen they handed you?" "I like it." "Not out of revenge," I said. "Out of principle. I want them to feel what it's like to need someone who sees them, who remembers everything." She nodded slowly. "Then let's tighten the bolts." We reviewed every angle. I confirmed that I was still under no legal obligation to disclose my own estate changes to them. That was important, because what they didn't know was that I had already transferred my condo into a holding LLC, that my assets were now spread across 2 trusts, one revocable, one not, that I'd quietly set up a scholarship fund in my name for underprivileged students pursuing accounting and finance, kids who reminded me of younger me. And I added a clause to my will that gave Tyler and my parents a combined total of $10, just enough to prevent them from contesting the will under most state laws. Next, I began shifting my public presence. I unfriended my parents on social media. I removed family ties from LinkedIn. I even changed my emergency contacts. I started showing up more in my own life, spending weekends with Jonathan, helping my goddaughter with school projects, volunteering at a local entrepreneurship workshop. I didn't tell anyone about the inheritance changes. That wasn't the point. This wasn't about burning bridges. It was about building a city on the other side and lighting it up so bright they couldn't ignore it. Then came the unexpected twist. 2 weeks before my birthday, I got a voicemail from Tyler. "Hey man, look, I know things have been weird, but I was wondering if you had time to chat. Not about mom and dad, about some stuff with the school. I don't know, man. I could use some advice. You always knew how to figure things out." It stopped me cold, not because I wanted to help, but because I could hear something real in his voice. A crack, a vulnerability he'd never shown before. And I realized something I hadn't expected. He was falling apart, which meant I was finally standing on solid ground. I didn't call back, but I did make a note. Because the timing was aligning perfectly, my parents' updated trust documents would be finalized soon. Their dependence on me was growing, slowly, quietly, but I could see it in the subtext of every email. Questions about taxes, about healthcare premiums, about whether the trust should be revised to include a clause for assisted living. They weren't just handing me a pen. They were handing me the last thread of their safety net. And I planned to pull it, carefully, precisely, when the moment was right. But first, I had one more piece to set in motion. Something personal, something symbolic. I called a friend of mine who worked in custom woodworking, commissioned a gift. It was a simple box, handcrafted walnut with brass hinges and a velvet interior. Inside, I placed a single item, The $38,571.12 receipt from the mortgage I paid off. Framed in glass. I sealed it and labeled the box, "For the executors of memory." And I wrote a letter. A real one. Not angry. Not emotional. Just factual. A list of everything I'd done for them over the years. The mortgage. The unpaid bills. The holiday meals. The medical bills. The rides. The forms. The quiet sacrifices. And at the end, I wrote, "You may not have remembered, but I never forgot." The box would remain locked in my office for now. It wasn't time to deliver it. Not yet. But soon. Because the final act was coming. And when it did, they wouldn't just see me. They'd remember me. Every version. Every shadow. Every quiet, overlooked act of love that kept this family from falling apart. And when the lights went out on their carefully crafted legacy, I'd be the one holding the switch. Not with rage. With resolve. Because the best revenge isn't destruction. It's revelation. And I was ready to reveal everything. They never saw it coming. My parents, I mean. They'd spent so many years convincing themselves that I was the quiet one, the helpful one, the good son, which to them just meant the one who didn't complain when they took more than they gave. They never understood that silence wasn't submission. It was study. I wasn't agreeing with their choices all those years. I was recording them. And eventually, every ledger balances. The final opportunity to collect arrived 6 months after that dinner at my condo, when my dad had a mild stroke. It wasn't devastating. Thankfully, no paralysis, no speech loss, but it was enough to shake them. Enough to make them start talking about next steps in earnest. I got the call from my mom at 10 p.m. She didn't ask if I was busy. She never did. "Your father's stable," she said in a tone that sounded almost rehearsed. "But the doctor said he should limit stress. We think it's time to put everything in order. Make sure the trust and medical directives are aligned, just in case." She paused, then added, "We need your help again." Of course they did. We met the next week at the house. The one I paid off. The one they'd left to Tyler. The atmosphere was quiet, not somber exactly, but something was different. For the first time, I saw the edge of fear in my father's posture. He wasn't the same man who used to bark commands over the grill or critique my posture during dinner. He looked smaller, like a balloon slowly deflating. Vulnerable. They'd printed everything out, the updated trust, the medical POA, a list of their accounts. They handed it to me like a child passing their science fair project to a parent. I skimmed it in silence while they talked about living wills, about not wanting to be a burden, about how Tyler was so busy with Noah applying to grad schools that this whole thing would just be easier if you took the lead, Wesley. I didn't respond right away. I wanted them to sit in the ask, to hear the quiet weight of what they were really saying. "We neglected you, but we still expect you to carry us." I looked up and asked flatly, "Are you giving me full control of the trust?" My mother glanced at my father. He nodded. "Of course. You're listed as sole successor trustee. You always do things right." He said it like a compliment. But I heard the confession underneath. "You're the one we expect to clean up after we're gone, too." I nodded slowly and stood up. "All right. Then there's one more thing I need to share before we proceed." I walked to my briefcase, pulled out the walnut box, and set it on the kitchen table. "This," I said calmly, "is a summary of everything I've done for you over the last decade." They exchanged confused glances. I flipped open the brass latch and lifted the lid. Inside, gleaming under the kitchen light, was the framed receipt for the $38,571.12 mortgage payment. Beneath it, the letter I'd written months ago, now printed on thick, cream paper. My father blinked. "What's this?" I motioned for him to read it. He picked it up, adjusted his glasses, and scanned silently. My mother read over his shoulder. As the words sank in, I watched the blood drain from her face. "I paid off your mortgage a week before Noah's graduation party," I said. "I did it quietly. I didn't ask for credit. I didn't even want thanks. But then you stood in front of an entire yard full of people and said your grandson was everything you ever hoped I'd be." My voice didn't waver. I wasn't angry anymore. I was finished. I laughed like it didn't break me. But you know what broke me more? That it never even occurred to you that maybe, just maybe, I had already done more for you than he ever would. Silence. My mom opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "Wesley, we didn't know." "I know you didn't," I said, "because you never looked. You never asked. You just assumed I'd keep showing up, no matter how little you gave back." Well, you were right. I did keep showing up. And now I'm going to show up one last time. To make sure your estate is handled exactly the way you asked. I placed the trust documents back in the folder and zipped up my briefcase. But there's been a few changes since we last spoke. My father looked uneasy. What kind of changes? I've moved all my assets into a private trust, I said. None of my estate will go to either of you, or to Tyler. You're not beneficiaries anymore. Legally, you can't contest it. You're being left exactly what you left me. Nothing. My mother's eyes welled. Wesley, don't do this. Your family. I nodded. Yes. And so was I, but I wasn't treated like it. She reached out across the table, like she could claw back 3 decades with a gesture. We made mistakes. That doesn't mean we don't love you. I tilted my head. You love the version of me that's useful. That's available. That doesn't ask for anything in return. But you don't love me. You never tried to know me. You only wanted me to carry the weight. They sat in stunned silence. No denials. No excuses. Just the sound of something crumbling, slowly, irrevocably. I took the folder and turned toward the door. Before I left, I added one final thing. I'm not abandoning you. I'll fulfill my legal duties. I'll manage the trust. I'll make sure everything's squared away. But after that, we're done. Then I walked out. No slamming doors. No dramatic music. Just finality. Over the next few months, the fallout began. Tyler called. Twice. Left long, rambling voicemails asking what was going on with the estate. Said mom and dad were acting weird and mentioned something about assets being transferred. I didn't answer. I'd already sent him a formal letter from my lawyer explaining that all my financial matters were private, and he had no claim to any of it. At work, I was promoted to partner level on a high-profile project. When I told my best friend Jonathan, he said, Dude, you've been running your life like a corporation for years. It's about time you started reaping the dividends. He wasn't wrong. Meanwhile, I continued volunteering with the entrepreneurship program. I became a mentor to 3 young men who reminded me of myself at 19. Hungry, unsure, full of quiet potential. I helped one of them launch his first small business. When he signed the lease on his retail space, he called me in tears. No one's ever believed in me like you do, he said. And just like that, I found something I'd never received from my own family, legacy. One afternoon, months later, I received a final envelope from my parents. No return address, just their handwriting. Inside was a photo. It was of me at age 10, holding a homemade science trophy I'd built out of soda cans and cardboard. I vaguely remembered it. A school contest I'd won that neither of them attended. On the back of the photo was a note in my father's handwriting. We should have shown up for more of your moments. We were too busy looking at the wrong sun. You were everything we ever hoped for. We just didn't know how to say it. Dad, I read it once. Then again. Then I folded the photo, placed it in my desk drawer, and let it be what it was. Too little, too late. But I didn't cry, because I didn't need that apology anymore. I'd already healed the wound. I'd already written the ending. And they were no longer the authors of my story. I was. And in the end, I didn't burn the bridge. I built the road that led me away from it.